Hi everyone, Kalyan Kumar from Product Review, and in this video I'll be unboxing, setting up and presenting a detailed guide of the Nikon D5600, a mid-range DSLR from Nikon that is budget friendly at Rs 53,000 in India, though I got it for Rs 45,000, and about $726 in the US, which comes along with the 18 to 55 mm and 70 to 300 mm kit lens. I consider it the best beginner's DSLR, and you will soon find out why. At the outset, let me caution you that this video is going to be really very long, perhaps the longest I've ever made. But if you have this camera or recently bought it or are planning on buying one and you want to know how to use this with a detailed understanding of its various functions, then watch this video from the beginning till the end. Of course, you don't have to watch it in one go, you can watch it in installments. And which is why I'm going to put chapter markers in the description below. But if you're wanting only specific aspects of this product, check out the timestamps for the different chapters. The reason I'm making one video and not a bunch of smaller videos is that everything here is interconnected to each other. And rather than suggesting you to look at other videos for reference every time, I thought it would be prudent for me to make one long complete video with the chapter markers. So let me begin with a disclosure. This product has been purchased by me with my own funds, and it is not a review product. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. This video is not sponsored, and no one is reviewing this video before it is uploaded. The Nikon D5600 is the newest of the Nikon's upper entry-level DSLR cameras. It packs a lot of impressive features and settings into what is meant to be a consumer DSLR. The result is quite good, but not without flaws. Do the benefits outweigh the problems? In this review, we will cover everything you should know before deciding on the camera for yourself. This is the big bundle that came from Amazon. Let's cut this open. The first thing out is the bag. Keeping that aside, let's go for the camera kit. Let's have a look at the box. Gives us what comes in this kit. Got two lenses. Opening the box. Paperwork. How to reach Nikon service centers. Pretty important. The warranty, papers and user manual. This is the camera body. Quite lightweight. This is the flip LCD screen, and it flips in many directions. This is the battery compartment. The SD card slot. This is the mini HDMI port for connecting external monitors. Let's open the camera cap and look at the lens mount. You can also see the CMOS Xpeed 4 sensor. Now comes the battery charger. Finally, we will unveil the lenses. The first to come out is the 18 to 55 mm lens. Very well protected. Now the strap, and now comes the 70 to 300 mm zoom lens. Finally, the battery. And this is what all you get in the box. Compact and lightweight, the D5600's body measures 4.9 into 3.9 into 2.8 inches. And it weighs 426 grams. The 18 to 55 mm AFP kit lens weighs an additional 211 grams, and the longer 70 to 300 mm lens weighs in at 425 grams. This is the perfect companion for travel and anytime you want or need to keep your camera bag light. The carbon fiber composite body feels just as sturdy as some more advanced cameras in Nikon's lineup, and not much worse than the high-end options like the D850. The Nikon D5600 is the sixth camera in Nikon's D5000 lineup. The first, the D5000 itself, was released in April 2009. Nikon skipped the 5400, but all the others do exist. 5100, 52, 53, 55, and this one, 5600. That said, it is hard to argue that each one of these successive DSLRs add many new features upon their predecessors. From the D5200 to the 5300, Nikon added GPS, Wi-Fi, extra battery life, and a slightly sharper screen. It was a noticeable update, if not a particularly big one. In the next generation, Nikon added a touchscreen and a bit more battery life to the D5500, but then they took away the GPS. Some people, particularly those who do not use the touchscreen feature on a DSLR, considered this to be a downgrade. The newest Nikon D5600 builds upon prior cameras in the lineup mainly by adding Nikon's Snap Bridge, which is a way to sync photos, most commonly 2 megapixel JPEGs, to your phone automatically while taking pictures from your camera. Snap Bridge also lets you see live view remotely and take pictures, although it is yet not sophisticated enough to let you control other camera settings. These D5000 series cameras are the only DX format Nikon SLRs with a vari-angle screen. This combination of novice friendliness, vari-angle screen, and small size make it ideal for both first-time camera users and photography students. This can be used in a variety of situations. Normal use could be you can fold the monitor against the back of the camera, facing out. Low angle shots. Tilt the monitor up to take shots in live view when the camera lens is pointing down. High angle shots. Tilt the monitor down to take shots in live view when the camera lens is pointing up. Self-portrait or selfie. Tilt the monitor such that it is facing you. Make sure to look at the monitor for confirming the shot frame and then look at the lens while clicking the picture. Many times people end up looking only at the monitor. The monitor can also act as a touch screen and many of the touch gestures can be used on it. More on it later. The battery used is a proprietary Nikon lithium-ion pack with 1230 mAh and 7.2 volts. A completely exhausted battery will fully charge in about an hour and 50 minutes. Insert the battery like this. Using the battery to keep the orange latch pressed to one side. The latch locks the battery in place when the battery is fully inserted. When you hold the camera for taking pictures, The memory card holder will be on the right side bottom of the camera. The camera supports SD, SDHC and SDXC cards. Since you would use the camera for videos too, it will be much wiser to use SDHC or SDXC cards. The SDHC cards come with a minimum storage of 8 gigs and a maximum of 32. SDXC cards will come with a minimum of 64 gig capacity and maximum going up to 2 terabytes. My camera kit came with 2 lenses, the AFP Nikkor 18 to 55 mm f3.5 to 5.6 G VR and the AFP Nikkor 70 to 300 f4.5 to 5.6 E EDVR. Attaching the lens is pretty simple. Remove the camera body cap. Remove the rear lens cap. Align the mounting marks of both the camera and lens. Rotate the lens towards the shutter release button and you'll hear a click. To remove the lens, press and hold the lens release button while turning the lens clockwise. When you use smaller lenses like the 18 to 55 mm, you will need to unlock it or expand it before you can use it. As you notice here, the lens is on L, meaning locked. Press the unlock button and rotate it to unlock it like this. And the focal length markings will guide you as to what the focal length is. For retracting the lens after use, press the unlock button again and bring it back to L. At this stage, it is advisable to enable VR, vibration reduction. Vibration reduction can be enabled by selecting on or off the optical VR in the shooting menu, if the lens supports this option, or by sliding the lens vibration reduction switch to on if the lens is equipped with a vibration reduction switch. In my case, I have only optical VR available. To switch it on, go to menu and press this camera icon. You will see the optical VR. Press it and touch on. You can also notice it when you press the I button or the information button and you will see this particular icon. Turn the camera on. A language selection dialog will be displayed. Press the up-down key to navigate the languages and press OK button to select it. You can change the language later also. When the Snap Bridge dialog opens, you can either set it up right then and there, and I prefer to do it later, so I'm going to press the menu button. Now we set the clock. Select the time zone. Select date format. Daylight saving is off. Select date and time. Remember, the time format is 24 hours. Now focus the viewfinder by removing the lens cap and rotating the diopter adjustment control until the AF area brackets are in sharp focus. If you attach a lens, then half pressing the shutter button will show up some numbers. Make sure the numbers are in focus. Now the camera is ready for use. In this part, we will take a tour of the camera's physical buttons and layout and understand briefly what these do. On this side, you will see a rubber gasket. Flip that out. And you will see 3 ports. The first is the remote shutter trigger. This allows to remotely press the shutter button without actually touching the camera. The next is the microphone port for connecting external mics. Do not depend on the internal mics as their quality is not good at all. The bottom part is the USB port and it's a micro USB port. This can't be used to charge the camera. You can only use it to transfer files to your computer off the memory card. There is also a port on the other side of the camera. This is the mini HDMI port. If you want to watch the pictures that you have taken or the videos on your TV, or you want to capture the touch monitor display on a HDMI capture card, you can use this port. You need a mini HDMI to full HDMI cable. This lamp here is used as AF assist illuminator, which is used when the subject is poorly lit. The AF assist illuminator will light automatically to assist the autofocus operation when the shutter release button is pressed halfway. The same is also used as a self-timer lamp and red eye reduction lamp. Some folks may think the light is too bright and don't want to be intrusive or not want to call attention to the camera when they are taking pictures. At other times, you may be photographing subjects like a pet or animal or even a baby, and you don't want them to be distracted by the illuminator light. It's easy to turn the focus assist light on or off. Go to menu, pencil icon, autofocus, built-in AF assist illuminator, and turn it off or on. To take a picture, make sure the lens is extended and switch on the camera by using this lever. When you get your camera, it will be in the green auto mode. But the idea of using a DSLR over your phone camera is not only to go for a better sensor that you find in the DSLR, but also to use so many of the options and controls in this camera. So work towards getting yourselves out of the auto mode. So you can start your journey with the P mode or the program mode. Everything is still auto, but it gives you more options to make decisions. To take a picture in the P mode, just point your camera, press the shutter button halfway, you can hear a beep, and if the subject is in the dark, the AF assist lamp will also light up, and now click further. So the shutter button is in 2 stages. Halfway it focuses and completely down it takes the picture. Flip the touch screen and press the play button to see the picture. Move the left, right keys to go back and forward to see other pictures. The touchscreen behaves like the screen of your smartphone. Pinch to zoom in and look at various parts to check whether they are all in focus. In the playback mode, you can also hit this I button and that will bring up this little menu which gives you the option to select the rating. If you scroll to the right with rating selected, you can rate the picture with a certain number of stars. Now let me tell you why that's useful. If you use an app like Adobe Lightroom to organize your pictures, when you import your pictures into your computer and into Lightroom, the number of stars that you select will show up there. So let's say you are out, you are shooting, you take let's say 200 pictures in a day, but while you are at lunch, you flip through and you find some good pictures that you really like, you can give them 5 stars. And then when you get back into your Lightroom, you'll be able to find these pictures without going through all the 200 pictures that you took that day. Of course, you can give the rating while reviewing the picture itself after each shot, but that of course takes away time from the scene that you're shooting. If you want to see something like the histogram, the f-stop, etc. for a particular picture, you'll need to go into the menu here. Hit the menu button and you will see this set of 6 different kind of tabs, different options if you like. And we are going to pick the top one up here, the little playback one, and then we are going to go down to the third option, playback display option. This shows you the different types of views for playback images that you can select from. I'm just going to highlight each of these and then select all of them so I can show you the differences. So now all those are selected. I'm going to hit OK down here and let's go back and hit the play button again. Now if I want to iterate through those different views, I'll push the up directional pad. Pushing up gives me all the metadata for the image, like the shutter speed, the f-stop, and the ISO, as well as my histogram. As I keep pushing up, it will give me more and more information, as I had selected all the metadata. To know more about histograms, check out one of my videos describing the exposure triangle, and I'll put its link in the description below. The main way you'll use this camera is with the optical viewfinder. Up here, you'll hold this up to your eye and you'll look through it. And when it focuses, you'll be able to see things highlighted. This is not an electronic display like on your smartphone. It is an optical viewfinder. It's literally light coming through the lens, then hitting the mirror inside and then bouncing up here into a prism and over to your eyes. So you're seeing stuff in real time. It's old-time tech. This allows you to see things instantly with no delay, and it also gives the camera the best possible focusing speed. The camera focuses very quickly when you have your eye up to the viewfinder. It is also going to register the least camera shake as the camera is close to your body and your elbows should be closed in. The other option is live view, which works exactly like when you take a picture with your smartphone. It's this display on the back. So if you want to use that, just pull the LV lever towards you. You'll hear the mirror flip out of the way and you will see whatever is hitting the sensor directly. You can also touch the screen to focus it. Here it focused and took a picture. If you don't want the shutter to go off on touching and you only want it to focus when you touch the screen, see this symbol up here? Touch it and it will disable or enable the touch shutter function. Now we'll see how to change the brightness of the touch screen. Now why would you want to do this? For the most part, the default is probably fine. But maybe you get out in the sun and you wish that the screen was a little brighter. Hit the menu button, go down to the wrench icon, and then on the first page, you will see the option for monitor brightness. So I'll scroll to the right and now I can go up and down to make the screen much brighter. Or I could go down and make it dimmer and save myself a little bit of battery life. Remember, brighter screens use more battery. So you might not want to do that unless you are struggling with the brightness in sunshine. If you're using the optical viewfinder here, you should be aware of the diopter. The diopter is like dialing in a contact lens or glasses prescription into the viewfinder, which is great if you don't have perfect vision. In fact, even if you do have perfect vision, you need to be aware of it, though, because this dial can be hit accidentally and then you'll go looking through it and it'll look as if you're looking through somebody else's glasses. Like the whole world would be all blurry and messed up. So you might think you're not focusing when it's actually just the diopter out of place. To set the diopter correctly, hold the camera up to your eye and hit the shutter button so it wakes up, and then don't look through the lens, look at the numbers at the bottom of the screen and turn the diopter until they are as sharp as possible. In fact, make it a habit to do that every time you're out and you open the camera for the first time that day. Let's talk about the different camera modes. Up until now, I've been just using P mode, which is program mode, and that's basically a full auto mode without artificial limitations. But most of the time when I'm doing my day-to-day shooting, I use aperture priority mode. That's marked with an A here. So I'll take the mode dial and switch it over to the aperture priority mode. Here's what aperture does. It does two things. The aperture is an opening in the lens, just like the iris in your eye. So it can open up big and let in lots of light, or it can close down small and let in less and less light. So in low light, you want to increase the aperture to let in more light, while in sunlight or bright light, you will want to decrease the aperture to let only a small amount of light to enter, or the picture will be overexposed. To show you the effect of aperture alone on the exposure of a picture, I'll go to the manual mode and fix the shutter speed, ISO, and change only the aperture. I'll take one picture at a low aperture of f22 and the other at a higher aperture of f3.5. As you notice, the f3.5 is far brighter than the f22 image. Also remember that the live view does not show the exact exposure of the image that will be taken. You can get the visual representation of the actual picture in the monitor only when you are in the manual mode, and that too with certain settings on. And I'll talk about that more in the manual mode. Here is a diagram of what different f-stops look like inside of a lens. You can see different f-stops. It's counterintuitive. f2.8, small number, has a big opening, and f22, a bigger number, has a smaller opening. This is because these numbers are based on ratios. So a large number in the denominator gives a smaller value of aperture and vice versa. You can learn more details of this in my exposure triangle video. Hit the link below. Besides controlling the amount of light that is let into the lens, the aperture changes what we call the depth of field, or the background blur of an image. Here are three pictures taken with the same 18-55mm kit lens, but with different f-stops. The first one is taken at f22, the second with f10, and the third with f3.5. The f22 image has both the front toy and the back toy in focus. This creates a distraction in a picture. As the f-stop decreases, the background becomes blurrier. In the f3.5 image, the background is very fuzzy, and this creates more focus on the main image than on the background. This is how you can use a picture to tell a specific story. It adds much more context, much more story, but at the same time, higher f-stops add many more distractions away from the main subject. So as a photographer, you get to choose the f-stop number, and that's part of the creative control that you get. To change the aperture in the aperture priority mode, first look at the monitor and you will see three main settings: the shutter speed on the left, aperture in the middle, and ISO on the right. I can easily change the aperture in the aperture priority mode by using the main dial. If I twist it to the right, you can see the f-stop number gets higher and higher, and it's actually visually showing me what the aperture looks like. It's getting smaller and smaller. You will also notice when I keep the focal length at 18, the minimum f-stop value will be smaller number 3.5. But if I increase the focal length with the minimum f-stop I can reach is actually 5.6, and this is mentioned in the lens. So remember, the lower value of focal length gives the lower f-stop, and the higher value gives the lower value of the higher f-stop. Every lens has two values of f-stop mentioned, and both are minimum values that can be reached for the two extreme focal lengths mentioned in the lens. You can change the aperture using the touchscreen as well, but try to use the dials and physical buttons as they will be faster, and over a period of time, you will build a muscle memory and know where things are. Aperture controls the amount of light coming into the lens, while the shutter determines how long that light stays during the shutter door opening and closing. If you set the shutter speed, then the shutter will open the moment you hit the shutter button completely and close depending on the speed specified. In the aperture priority mode, the camera will take care of the shutter speed on its own. But if you're keen on a specific shutter speed, then bring the mode dial to S and turn the main dial to the desired shutter speed. The slowest speed is 30 seconds and the highest speed is 1/4000th of a second. Most of the time, you're going to be in the range of 1/60th of a second or 1/30th of a second. 1/30th is okay for still portraits if you're in a dim environment. Faster the movement, faster the shutter speed. If you're taking pictures of active kids, you probably want to be at 1/25th of a second or 2/50th of a second. For faster sports, go to 500th of a second. For wildlife photography, things like flying birds, you probably want to be in 1600th to 2000th or even 2500th of a second. Just as before, you can adjust the shutter speed by using the touch screen if you so choose. These are 4 images of a fan rotating. The first is taken at 1/800th of a second, the second at 2/50th of a second, the third at 1/60th of a second, and the fourth at 1/8th of a second. The first image does not convey any motion, while the last two do convey motion. Here are 3 pictures of a girl with her father who is clicking her picture. They are both on one of those spinning merry-go-rounds things. and the father is facing the daughter, so they are both spinning at the same speed in all these pictures. But at 1/8 of a second, you can see the background is nice and blurred because they are moving. She remains still because she is moving at the same speed as the photographer. This tells a story. It tells a story that they are on a merry-go-round and spinning. If the photographer increases the shutter speed and makes it faster and go to 1/30th of a second, you can see the background still visibly moving, but it's not moving as much and it's not as nicely blurred. And if the father goes all the way up to 1/25th of a second, it no longer looks like they're moving, but they are. You just can't see it anymore. That's the creative stories they're telling. You can see if the camera chooses it right. If you let the camera decide, it probably would have chosen 1/25th of a second or even faster, and you never would have known what they were doing. You wouldn't even know they were on a merry-go-round at all. So that's the kind of thing you need to think about as a photographer. The shutter speed that you want to select in order to best tell the story. Now, what if you want to control both the shutter speed and the aperture at the same time? That's what manual mode is for. Select M on the dial. Now, if we bring the screen here, you can see we can adjust the shutter speed by using the main dial, just like we did in the shutter priority mode. We want to adjust the aperture. We are going to hold down this plus minus button right next to the shutter. So I'll hold that down and then you will move the main dial. Alternatively, of course, you can use the touch screen and adjust those up or down independently. Now, manual mode gets to be a little more complex because you're taking more complete control over these two factors. So you don't necessarily need to dive right into it if you're a beginner. Get comfortable controlling one or the other and what those effects are before you decide what you're going to control both at the same time. You would notice that in none of the modes, the live view clearly gives you an idea of the exposure of the actual image. In other modes, such as the A or S, you control only one parameter and the others are automatically controlled by the camera. So maybe the exposure in other modes may get adjusted. But in manual mode, one should be able to see the exposure changing with different shutter speed and aperture values. But normally you don't. I'm changing the shutter speed and the live view remains the same. But when I click a picture, it's almost black. Click a picture. This one too is underexposed. So how to make the monitor react to the correct exposure settings? Go to menu. Camera icon. Last setting is movie settings. Hit the right key. Go to manual movie settings and switch it on. Now if you see the live view, when I change the shutter speed, the monitor shows how the exposure is changing. Take a pic and it matches the monitor display. Remember, the slowest shutter speed you will get in these settings is 1/30th of a second if you want the monitor display to match the actual exposure. To change the exposure, you cannot go to the plus minus button and rotate the dial. You need to hit the I button, change the aperture and come back to the live view to check. And remember, this only works in the manual mode. Now let's get into bulb mode. You see the minimum shutter speed or maximum exposure time I can select is 30 seconds. So what if I need to use a longer exposure time? We'll come to the why part later. But how do I get longer than 30 second exposure time? In the manual mode, I scroll to the left one more time of shutter speed and select bulb mode. Now in bulb mode, the shutter stays open as long as you hold your finger down on the shutter. And when you take your finger off, it closes. Now, no one using the bulb mode would ever hold the shutter button that long. So one of the ways of using the bulb mode is to use the camera remote to prevent shake. You actually don't have to do that on this camera because this camera has timer mode also. If I scroll one more time, I reach the time mode. In this, you have to push the shutter button once to open it up and then take off your finger and push it again to close it. So hit the shutter button once, look at your watch, hit it again to close it. In live view, bulb mode and time mode behave the same way. You hit the screen once to open the shutter, and when you hit it next, the shutter closes. Now, why and when do we use this kind of exposure time? Bulb mode is used in nighttime photography. This is bulb mode picture of star trails. Exposure time was 45 minutes. This is the lightning shot taken with a 15-minute exposure time. This is a daytime bulb mode with exposure time of 2 minutes and use of ND filter to reduce exposure. This is the shot that I took from my house at night. The darker shot has a 30-second exposed shot, while the other one has an exposure time of 3 minutes. The bulb term comes from the old film days where you would actually use a bulb that was a shutter trigger, and you could kind of lock the ball down so that the shutter would lock at open. Another option for using the shutter is to use a self-timer. There are a couple of reasons you might want to use this option. You might be taking a selfie, you'll set the camera up on a tripod, and then you hit the shutter and you'll run in front of the camera and take a selfie. It's also a good option for taking family groupies. To do so, push this button on the front. Select the self-timer mode. frame the shot, press the shutter release button halfway to focus and then completely. The camera will start beeping and the AF lamp will flash. As it nears the end, it will be faster and it will take the picture. You'll notice that it had taken 4 shots one by one, and this is how you can program it. You can change the time for the delay as well as number of shots to be taken. Hit the menu button, then the pencil icon. Go to timers/AE lock, click OK. Now select self timer delay, press the right button and choose the delay time. Go to number of shots and choose any value between 1 to 9 and then hit OK. By default, when you push the shutter all the way, it's going to take one picture. And even if I hold it down, it's going to still take one picture. If you are shooting sports, you probably want to take a picture as fast as possible so that you can quickly take the next picture and so on. Now, trying to take picture like this will be way too slow. In those cases, you will select continuous shutter mode. Hit the same stack button again on the front and it will bring up the same options. The S is for single shot mode, L for continuous low speed shots, H is for continuous high speed shots. Since this camera does not have very high speeds, for any sport event, H is fine. After selecting it, press the shutter button halfway to focus and press it completely and hold it there. It will keep taking pictures continuously till the shutter button is pressed. Now, if the SD card is not a fast one, you will hear it taking pictures fast and then the speed slows down. This is due to buffering as the camera is writing to the SD card, and if the SD card has slow write speed, then this will happen. So if you're going to be using this mode often, make sure to get a high speed class 10 SD XE cards. Focusing also has different modes. By default, the camera will try to figure out whether you're focusing on a still subject or a moving subject. But you're smarter than the camera, and you should tell it whether the subject is still or moving by changing the different focusing modes, and I'll show you how to do that now. The easiest way to do this is to bring the screen up, and then I'll hit the I button here. Near the lower left corner, right now it's set to AFA. Touch that and now I can select the different focusing modes. AFA is the default. It's AF automatic where the camera is thinking about everything. If I'm shooting a still subject, I'll select AFS for still subject, single focus, or I'll select AFC for continuous focusing mode. With continuous focusing mode, the camera doesn't focus quite as precisely. However, if the subject is moving like it is for sports or wildlife, usually it will track that movement. So AFC is pretty good on this camera. You shouldn't run into any problems if you always leave it on AFC also. You'll probably still get pretty good results, but I always prefer AFS because I think it's a little more accurate for still subjects. If a subject is moving and you use AFC, you will have to keep the shutter release button half pressed all the time to use AFC. But the moment you press it to take the shot, the AFC stops after that. For the next shot, again you'll have to half press the shutter button to regain focusing, which would cause some delay to repeat the process again and again. can also select from different focusing areas. So by default, when you look through the viewfinder, the camera might focus anywhere on the viewfinder, all the way out towards the edges of the screen. And that can work really well for you sometimes. Sometimes, however, it might focus on the wrong thing. It might decide to focus on a branch rather than the bird, or it might focus on the wrong person in a group of people. Imagine what will be your fate if you were to take a picture of your wife on a beach and instead the camera focused on the lady behind her. Because of that, I almost always choose a single focusing point and then choose where I'm going to focus on rather than letting the camera decide. This is one of those differences between an absolute beginner and somebody with even just a little more experience. To select your own focusing point, I find the easiest thing to do on this camera is to again hit this I button. And now you can select this option here. It's right next to the AF focusing. And by default, the AF area mode is selected where it will choose all for you. What I prefer is this single focus point. Single point AF. Now it's going to focus on one spot exactly where I tell it. And as I hold my eye up to the viewfinder, I'm going to use the directional pad here to select my focusing point. So you will see the red box just move around and you put it right on the closest to the person you're taking a portrait of. It will just help you nail the focus. You can choose 3D tracking for sports, and for that choose the AFC continuous and select the 3D tracking. In 3D tracking mode, the person will move across the frame with changing focal length like a bird flying towards you, and the camera will continue to focus on all those points without you having to move your shots. Obviously, since you have selected AFC, you will continue to hold the shutter button halfway, and with every click, select continuous high-speed shots mode. Think of focus area selection as choosing between whether you want focus points to prioritize a single target in your scene, a group of targets with a larger set of targets in a scene, or any target in a scene at any time. Whereas a focus mode, not to be confused with focus area, asks you whether the subject is still or moving. That's all. This is an advanced focusing tip, and if you have just starting off, you may skip this part. I'll start off by what is known as focus and recompose technique. This works primarily when you are in the autofocus mode. The rest of the settings may be in manual mode, but the focusing is in autofocus. Moreover, you need to be in the AFS or the still image mode. In most of the cameras, the autofocus points are concentrated towards the center. Sometimes you want to focus on a point which is outside the coverage area of the autofocus points. And in this case, you have no option but to use focus and recompose. In this technique, what you do is take a focus point as close to where you want to focus, press the shutter release button halfway to focus, move the camera to the actual frame you want by holding the shutter button halfway to keep the focus locked, and then click the picture. Since the focus got locked on the desired point, moving the camera will not change the focus of that point. This way you can focus on points outside the general focusing area. When you normally click a picture, you press the shutter button halfway to focus and then completely to take the picture. In back button focus, we assign the focusing task to another button at the back of the camera, and the shutter button is only to click. Now, why would you want to do that? Let's say you're doing a wedding photography or portrait. Your subjects are standing or slightly moving, and you click pictures. Since they're not moving much, you're on the single point focus mode. We all know that when people know they are being photographed, they tend to freeze up a little, be a little uptight. So you'll ask your subjects to behave as normal as possible. And you'll want to capture as many moments as you can, more natural movements. never knowing when you'll actually get the right picture with a natural smile or affection. If you rely on your shutter button to focus every time, then it will take more time to take a picture. You will press the shutter button halfway, then completely, after which the focus is lost. Again to repeat, you will again do it halfway, then press fully. Every time you tend to regain focus, you waste time. But if you assign the focusing task to a back button, then all you need to do is press it for focus, hold it, click the shutter button as many times as you want, and take as many pictures. In wildlife photography, this is very, very crucial. Keep the back focus button pressed, and the camera will continuously focus on the animal and keep clicking shots as the animal moves. You should be on AFC, which will track the subject constantly while your shutter button is only clicking pictures. Go to menu. Pencil icon. Controls. Press the right button. Go to the second option that says Assign AE AF Lock. Press the right button. Click on AF On. Now this button is used for focusing, and the shutter button only opens and closes the shutter. About the other options, I'll discuss that in button customization. Now, besides aperture and shutter speed, the third factor that controls the brightness of your picture is ISO. It's pronounced ISO and not ISO. In a nutshell, ISO controls the relative sensitivity of your sensor. So in a dim environment, you would use a higher ISO to make your sensor more sensitive to that dim light. Or if you were outside the bright sun, use a low ISO to reduce the sensitivity. At lower ISOs, the camera's picture will be much more cleaner. You won't see any of that digital grain. On a high ISO like 6400, you will see a lot of that noise, and your pictures will look less sharp and maybe a little bit uglier. So it's always beneficial to use a lower ISO. You can change the ISO either by hitting the I button and toggling to ISO option, hit OK and change as you desire. Or hold the function button in the front and move the main dial. You can change it from a low ISO, let's say of 100, where you will get the cleanest picture, all the way up to 25,600, where we will be able to take pictures in very, very dim light, but the pictures will have a lot of noise. On modes other than the green auto mode, the camera will not adjust the ISO automatically. If you want to set auto ISO irrespective of the mode you are in, which is a great thing to do, and I almost always use auto ISO, what you'll do is you'll get into the menu system here. You'll go to the camera icon. Then right at the bottom here is ISO sensitivity settings. I'll touch that and see auto ISO sensitivity control. I'll just set that to on. So that's one of the first things I would do on this camera, to auto ISO sensitivity control on. Another real important thing to know about your camera is how to use exposure compensation. Exposure compensation controls the final brightness of the overall image. To use this, I prefer the live view. Let's assume that you're not happy with the exposure here. You want it to be brighter, but maybe it is a little bit darker, and you've changed everything, and you don't want to increase the ISO, otherwise you'll hit more grain. So hit the plus minus button in the live view and rotate the control dial to increase or decrease the exposure. This is useful when the lighting is not that good and the auto ISO didn't do a very good job. This will help you get a much better image on the fly. Bracketing is a technique that comes from the days of film cameras, the ones that use film rolls. Photographers would not be able to review their pictures instantly, so they would never quite be sure if they were nailing the exposure or maybe they were underexposing it or perhaps even overexposing it. So what they would do is use bracketing to take 3 pictures. They take a picture at what they thought was the right exposure, then they would take a picture that was a little underexposed compared to that, and a one which was a little overexposed compared to that. And when they got back to the photo lab, they would develop all the images and decide which of those 3 pictures was best. To set it up, press the I button. Go to BKT option. Hit OK and choose AE 2.0. With that selected, frame your shot, click 3 pictures. Now ideally it should be done using a tripod. Now the camera will take the first picture with the best exposure it thinks it can achieve. The next will be 2 stops less exposed and the next will be 2 stops higher exposed because we did AE 2.0. These days, bracketed photos in fact are used later to create HDR, high dynamic range pictures. Many applications like the Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop help you create HDR photos from a group of bracketed photos. You can also use the self timer at say 2-second intervals and it will automatically take 3 pictures in succession. One of the choices you encounter on many digital cameras is whether to save the photos from your camera as a JPEG or a RAW file. This choice can have significant impact on the processing options and possibilities available to you. The advantages of RAW become clear once you start editing your photos in programs like Photoshop or Lightroom. When an image is captured in a digital camera, it is recorded as raw data. If the camera format is set to JPEG, this RAW is then processed and compressed before it is saved in the JPEG format. So in fact, it takes more time to save a picture as JPEG. If the camera format is set to RAW only, no processing is applied and therefore the file stores more tonal and color data. With more data stored in the file, there is more processing flexibility than a JPEG can offer because it is already processed. It's like 2 meals, one in which almost every ingredient can be increased or decreased, while the other in which the meal is already cooked and can only be heated or cooled. Here is an example of an image in RAW and JPEG format, which was shot with the same exposure, and this is after all the post-processing in both. In the D5600, you have 7 options. Hit the menu button. Touch the camera icon, come down to image quality. You can shoot RAW and JPEG fine, that is high quality, or RAW with JPEG normal, RAW with JPEG basic, or only RAW, or only JPEG fine, only JPEG normal, or only JPEG basic. I will always recommend you use the first setting. Shooting in JPEG gives you the option of immediately sharing your picture in Instagram or Facebook or wherever, which you cannot do with RAW. Later on, when you have developed sufficient skills in Photoshop or Lightroom, you can go back to the RAW files and edit them to get better results of these pics. Moreover, keep the image size as maximum 24 megapixels. Metering is how your camera determines what the correct shutter speed and aperture should be depending on the amount of light that goes into the camera and the ISO. Back in the old days of photography, cameras were not equipped with light meters, which is a sensor that measures the amount and intensity of light. Photographers had to use handheld light meters to determine the optimal exposure. Obviously, because the work was shot on film, they could not preview or see the results immediately, which is why they religiously relied on those light meters. Today, every DSLR has an integrated light meter that automatically measures the reflected light and determines the optimal exposure. You can see the camera meter in action when you shoot in manual mode. Look inside the viewfinder or the live view and you will see bars going left or right with a 0 in the middle. If you point your camera at a very bright area, the bars will go to the plus side, indicating there is too much light for the current exposure settings. If you point your camera at a very dark area, the bars go on the minus side, indicating that there is not enough light. You would then need to increase or decrease your shutter speed to get to 0, which is the optimal exposure according to your camera meter. The most common metering modes in digital cameras today are matrix metering, center weighted metering, and spot metering. I'll leave my camera always in the matrix metering. In this, the camera divides the entire frame into multiple zones, which are then all analyzed on individual basis for light and dark tones. After reading the information from all individual zones, the metering system looks at a very focused within the frame and marks it more important than all the other zones, and based on some mathematics, it gives a light meter reading. The center weighted metering evaluates the light in the middle of the frame and its surroundings and ignores the corners. Compared to matrix metering, center weighted metering does not look at the focal point or the focus point you selected and only evaluates the middle area of the image. Now, you can use this mode if you want the camera to prioritize the middle of the frame, which work great for close-up portraits and relatively large subjects that are generally in the middle of the frame. Spot metering only evaluates the light around your focus points and ignores everything else. Now, this is most useful when in a portrait the background is very highly exposed than the subject. The camera has a built-in flash, and if you have this in the full auto mode, the flash will just pop up and fire without you doing anything whenever it feels it should. But if you switch into one of the creative modes, like the program mode or A mode or maybe the S mode or even the manual mode, you'll have to manually activate it, and to do that, you just push this flash button here to the left of the flash and it will pop up. And when it's up, it will fire no matter what you do. If you don't want it to fire, just physically push it back down and it will snap into place. If that ends up being too bright for you, you can use flash exposure compensation to decrease the amount of brightness of the flashlight. Flash exposure compensation allows you to dial up or down the amount of flash output. So here's where it's most useful. You'll take a shot and everybody's faces are overexposed and you realize you need the flash but at a low brightness. So hit the I button here. You'll scroll over to this icon that says flash compensation, hit that. Now I can dial it down, usually like minus 1.3 is a good setting. So with that, now when I take a picture, it's going to output 1.3 stops less light. Each stop is a doubling or halving of light. So minus one stop would be half the light. So minus 1.3 is a little less than half the light. White balance ensures that colors are unaffected by the color of the light source. Press the I button and go to the WB settings. I prefer auto. You can choose any of the other settings you want and hit OK. You can also set the white balance using menu button. Press the menu button. Go to the camera icon, scroll down to white balance, hit the right button and you will see all the options. If you select an option, hit the right key again, you will see 5 new tuning options. You can make changes and save changes to hit OK. If you are getting pictures that are a little too yellow or a little too blue or green or purple, the problem is white balance. You can create a preset for white balance. This can be done in 2 ways. Use measure for doing it in real time, or use a picture which is there in your camera and which you consider is perfectly white under the given light conditions. To use measure, place a white object. I prefer a paper. In the given lighting conditions, go to menu settings, camera icon, white balance, scroll to PRE preset manual, hit the right key and hit measure. It'll ask you for overwriting, select yes. When the camera is ready to measure white balance, a flashing PRE will appear in the viewfinder and information display. Frame the reference object so that it fills the viewfinder and press the shutter release button all the way down. No picture is recorded. White balance can be measured accurately even when the camera is not in focus. If the camera was able to measure the white balance, then GD will appear in the viewfinder or data acquired on the monitor. If lighting is too dark or too bright, the camera may be unable to measure white balance. A message will appear in the information display or no GD appears on the viewfinder. To copy from a picture in the camera, go again to the menu, camera icon, WB and go for PRE. Hit the right button and this time hit use photo. Go to select image and hit the right arrow. Choose a folder, select the image and hit OK. Recording video is pretty easy. Turn on live view. Tap the monitor to focus and hit the record button. You can tap different places of the frame to change focus, but the change will not be very smooth. You do have a couple of options that you can configure. So I'll hit the menu button here and on the camera icon, go to the last setting, that is movie settings. Select frame size, frame rate. You will see 7 options. Select the one you need. Generally, TV shows are recorded and broadcasted at 30 fps or 30p in India, while movies are generally recorded at 25p. Our eyes can easily see movement at 24p. I prefer higher frame rates as they offer more smooth compositions. And with higher frame rates, you can even do a slow-mo at 30 fps. Then comes the movie quality, high or normal. High uses less compression, preserves more detail and has bigger file size. Moreover, the maximum time of recording is detailed here. Then you have the microphone setting. First of all, never ever record audio of a video using a camera's built-in mic, no matter how high the camera quality may be. Mics of all cameras, no matter how expensive and professional, simply suck. If you're recording separate audio and syncing it in post, then the built-in mic is fine. But if you're planning on using a built-in mic for your final video, then don't. Always hook up a decent external mic and connect it to this camera with the 3.5mm mic port in your camera. Then in mic settings, choose auto or manual sensitivity. Now suppose you have a soundproof studio with very limited source of background noise. And if two people are speaking at different volumes, the auto level will decrease the volume of the person speaking loudly and increase the volume of the person speaking softly, thereby automatically adjusting the volume of both. And when both are silent, even if it boosts the volume, there is no background noise anyway. But if you're shooting outdoors, then choose manual volume. Because the moment any subject stops speaking, the camera will try to increase the mic volume to capture sound, and this will record a lot of unwanted background noise. So use manual mode and let both speakers speak at the loudest and adjust the levels so that no subject's audio peaks. Select wind noise reduction on to enable the low cut filter, but this is only for the built-in mic. It will not affect anything with an external mic. If you plan to shoot movies in manual mode, then select the manual movie settings on. This will allow manual adjustments to shutter speed and ISO sensitivity. The camera automatically takes photos at selected intervals to create a silent time-lapse movie using the options currently selected for frame size, frame rate, and movie quality under movie settings in the shooting menu. Before you begin the time lapse, make sure you have a fully charged battery, you have sufficient space in the memory card, and if your time interval is short, you are shooting in RAW, and the memory card is a high-speed memory card. I generally use a 400 gig class 10 memory card. You use a tripod, and if you're using the camera outdoors, use auto white balance as the lighting conditions can change. Go to menu, camera icon, time-lapse movie. Hit the right button. Choose the interval. Make sure the interval is longer than the shutter time. This means you should not have a shutter time of 2 seconds while the interval is only 1 second. The maximum interval between shots is 10 minutes. Choose the shooting time, which is the length of time the camera keeps taking picture. Max is 7 hours and 59 minutes. Enable or disable exposure smoothing. Selecting on smooths abrupt changes in exposure in modes other than M, and in M also it will work only if the ISO is set to auto. The camera will automatically stitch all these shots into a time-lapse movie. So the total number of frames in the final movie can be calculated by dividing the shooting time by the interval and rounding it up. The length of the final movie can then be calculated by dividing the number of frames by the frame rate selected in the frame size, frame rate in the movie settings. It also appears here, and this is the maximum length that can be recorded, which is 20 minutes, which is based on 24 FPS, the smallest FPS available in this camera, assuming it is 7 hours and 59 minutes. This is a feature which results in a similar movie as a time-lapse movie, but it has a lot more advantages and perhaps one disadvantage. In a time-lapse movie, each picture can be taken at a minimum interval of 1 second and a maximum interval of 10 minutes. That means in the fastest mode, the camera will keep clicking one picture every second till the duration specified in the shooting time is over, or the slowest it can do so is click a picture every 10 minutes till the duration of the movie. Moreover, the resolution HD, FHD is based on the resolution of the movie setting. The frame rate is also based on that. Now, since this camera can record a maximum resolution of only 1920 by 1080 at a maximum FPS of 60, the time-lapse movies cannot exceed this. In interval time recording, the shooting interval can range from 1 picture per second to 1 picture for 24 hours. Such long time intervals may be needed for very slow projects like a building construction where you want to show each floor getting ready quickly. Moreover, the camera does not convert these into movies on its own. It stores them as individual pics, and you have to use some photo and video editing apps to convert them into a movie. Now, this can seem like a downside, but it gives you far greater control and flexibility. You are not now limited by the maximum movie resolution of the camera. Remember, this camera, the Nikon D5600, is a 24 megapixel shooter. Each image has a resolution of 6000 into 4000 pixels, which is actually 11.5K. So with this camera, you can take a time-lapse movie of 11.5K resolution using the interval time photography. On top of that, you can shoot in RAW. And these RAW images can be first processed in Lightroom for color and then brought into a video editing app for conversion into a movie. To set it up, hit the menu option and select interval timer shooting. Hit the right key, scroll down to start option and either choose now or select the date and time of starting the process. Better to set it at the end. Now go to interval and press the right key. Select interval, max is 24 hours and minimum is 1 second. Hit OK. Hit the left key to go back and now come down to the number of times. Now in the interval time photography, you don't specify the duration. Instead, you simply specify the number of shots you want, which is I think pretty simple. Max is 9999 and minimum is 1. Hit OK and press the left key and set the exposure smoothing. Now some people have asked me the difference between what is an interval time video or a stop motion video as some people call it, and what is the difference between taking a video and making it go faster. The difference in an interval time photography is that you make objects move as if they are moving on their own. Say you want to make an object move from position A to B and want to make it look like as if it is doing it on its own. Now what you can do is keep the interval at say 3 seconds, keep the object at A, start the time interval shooting, then make it move slightly in the direction of B, remove your hand before the next shot and keep doing this till the object moves to B. Now in this time-lapse video created, the object will seem to move on its own, while in the video your hand will be seen in moving it, even if you make it faster, and it will look totally absurd. There is a mirror inside every DSLR. When you look through the viewfinder on your camera, we are actually seeing the reflection of what the mirror is seeing through the lens attached to the camera. When you're shooting with your camera on a tripod, the movement of the mirror will slightly reduce the sharpness of the image. In a mirror lockup feature, the mirror flips first and after a slight delay, the shutter opens and closes. This way, the flipping of the mirror does not affect the image as it flips before the image is captured. You would need this when you're doing long exposures in low light conditions where even a slight movement would blur the image, like landscape pictures during dusk or dawn. When you add telephoto lens, you would be zooming in a lot, and again any small vibration would affect the image. Even while doing macro photography, you would probably don't want this to happen. In Nikon cameras, mirror lockup MLU is actually called exposure delay. Go to menu, pencil icon, scroll down to exposure delay mode and switch it on. It will give you a 1 second delay between the mirror flipping and the shutter opening. A much better way of mirror lockup in my view is live view. When you switch on live view, the mirror automatically flips up, and using a remote trigger, you can make sure the shutter opens and closes without any vibrations. Nikon's Snap Bridge is an app for your smartphone that allows wireless connection between the camera and your smartphone. Now you can get photos transferred to your phone instantly when the photos are taken with the camera. Secondly, the camera can connect to your smartphone by either using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is the hotspot of the camera. This is extremely useful when we are shooting high-res pictures and want to immediately share them on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram or any such app. The camera connects to your phone either using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and this of course you can decide. Moreover, the connection features of the two are different. I have an iPhone, but everything is same with an Android, and in fact Android has an additional feature. Go to the App Store or Play Store and search for SnapBridge. You should download the first one, which is SnapBridge, and not the one below that, which is SnapBridge 360 or 170. Open the app. It will ask you for some information. Click OK to all. Now it will ask you to connect to the camera. So go to your camera, hit menu, wrench icon, third page, and hit connect to smart device and hit the right button. Hit OK. It'll ask you for NFC connection. If you have an Android, hit the NFC area of the camera, which is behind the camera on the right side. Otherwise, simply hit OK. In fact, in my experience, I found the Android NFC not working at all. Now hit connect to cameras on your phone. Choose the first option. Your camera name will show up. Tap that. Hit understood. It will connect to your camera. Now it will ask you to select an accessory, and after a while your camera name will again show up, and tap that. It will now give you an authentication code. Hit pair. Your phone is now paired with the camera. Now on your smartphone, turn the auto link on. This enables you to auto download a picture when it is clicked, synchronize your phone clocks with your cameras, and also by using your phone's GPS, you can send location ID for every picture into your camera. When you open these pictures in Lightroom, it will show up the location of these pictures on a map. Pairing is now complete. Give all other permissions. Now your camera will ask for permissions. At this time, your camera is ready to transfer pictures to your phone while you take pictures. And all of these connections are happening through Bluetooth. You cannot connect to Bluetooth of the camera using the phone settings. It must be done only by using SnapBridge app. But remember, you only get a 2 megapixel JPEG image automatically downloaded when you're shooting a picture, no matter in which format you choose, in which JPEG format you choose. But this would be sufficient for you to post to the web. But if you're shooting only RAW, then no JPEG will be transferred to your phone, unless you're shooting RAW and JPEG. Now let's first look at how Bluetooth transfer works. Go to menu, wrench icon, scroll to the third page and check whether Bluetooth is on. Open the SnapBridge app on your smartphone and check whether you see the Bluetooth symbol. I'm opening the live view to show you what picture I'm taking. The pic is taken. You can see the transfer taking place. Go to the album tab and you will see the thumbnails. And you can see the pic had been transferred. You can see it's the same pic. The same pic in fact will automatically get loaded up into your gallery or camera roll. Now suppose you want to download specific pictures or download pictures with the original quality, you need to switch on Wi-Fi connection. In Wi-Fi, you can also control the camera to take pictures remotely. To do this, first enable Wi-Fi in your camera. In your camera, go to Menu, wrench icon, Wi-Fi, and hit Enable Wi-Fi connection. Remember, once you enable Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth of your camera will be switched off. It will give your camera's SSID and password. Go to Wi-Fi of your smartphone, select the camera's hotspot, put the password and connect to the camera's Wi-Fi. I've already connected to it. Now go to the SnapBridge app on your smartphone, hit download pictures. You can not only download full resolution images, but you can also download videos in this case. I'm downloading a video. It'll give you a warning that your Wi-Fi is not connected to the internet. Doesn't matter. You can always use your mobile data for internet. There you can see the video. It will also be added to the camera roll. As I mentioned earlier, the phone cannot download RAW files. Now, in case you shoot in RAW only, you can convert the RAW to JPEG in your camera itself. I'm taking a RAW picture. Now touch the I button and select retouch and press the right button. Go to RAW processing. The second option from the top is normal, which means JPEG normal. If you want to change it, you can change it, or else hit EXE to execute. Now the image has also been saved as a JPEG along with the RAW file. Now go to the SnapBridge app, hit download pictures, you will see the newly converted JPEG. As you download, it asks you for the option of original resolution or 2MP. Now we'll see how to remotely control the camera with your smartphone. In the app, hit remote photography. The live view will be displayed on your phone and the live view from the camera will disappear. You can remotely take a picture from your phone. The advantage in an Android phone is that once you have the phone connected to the camera with Wi-Fi, you can connect to the camera Wi-Fi later on also from the SnapBridge app itself without going into the settings. Whereas in an iPhone, you have to go to settings, Wi-Fi settings, choose the name of your camera's Wi-Fi, and then connect, and then come back to the SnapBridge app to perform everything. While connected using Bluetooth, you will remain connected to the camera even if you close the app, SnapBridge app on your phone, or go to any other app on your smartphone. But while using Wi-Fi, you will get disconnected from the camera, even if you go to another app without even closing SnapBridge app. You can use the D5600 as a webcam. And I'm talking about using it as a webcam by only using the USB, micro USB cable, and not with HDMI capture card, which can be done with any camera. To do this, go to the link in the description and download the Nikon webcam utility software. Install it, connect your camera with the micro USB cable. Now open up any video conferencing app in your computer, let's say Zoom, and when you click the new meeting tab, under camera icon, you will see new camera called Nikon webcam utility. With the D5600 on, you will now be able to use it as a webcam. My advice to all users of DSLRs is never to delete any picture from the card using the camera. Many a times it has happened with me that I took a couple of pictures, and sometimes during a break I looked into those photos and started deleting pictures, and inadvertently ended up deleting some very important and good shots. Always empty all your card contents to your computer before you wipe the card clean. And instead of deleting all the images, just format the card. Always format a new card in your camera before you start shooting pictures. Now to format the card, go to menu, wrench icon, and the very first option is format memory card. Select it, hit the right key. It will ask you, do you want to format it? Hit yes, press OK. Now in case you end up formatting a card and you realize you still have some pics that you haven't backed up, don't worry, you can still recover all your pics, provided you haven't used the card after formatting it. Go and check out my review of an app called Recuva down in the description below, which is a free tool for Windows 10 that helps you recover all your files which are either deleted or formatted from a drive. After you've been using your camera for maybe a month or so, you realize you use some options more often than others. And maybe you get tired of getting through all the menus for something you can customize for each of the different buttons do. You can customize two physical buttons, a touch panel on the monitor while viewing through the viewfinder, and a rotation dial. These are the 4 customizations possible. The first key to customize is the function key on the front. Go to menu, then pencil icon. Press the right key, controls, right key again, and select assign FN button. By default it is set to ISO and I'm okay with that. So while looking through the viewfinder or in live view, press the function button and rotate the main dial and ISO changes. Next to customize is the AE/AF lock button. Again in control, select F2, which is the assign AEL/AFL button. Click the right button. You can choose from any of the options available. Now if you choose AE/AF lock, then both the focus and the exposure lock while the button is pressed. As long as the button is pressed at the back, it is locked. If you select AE lock only, then only the exposure locks while the button is pressed. If you select AE lock hold, then exposure is locked when you press the button once. You can release the button and it will still be locked. It will unlock only when you press it for the second time. If you select AF lock only, then only the focus locks. If you select AF on, then every time you press this button, it gets focus, while the half shutter press will not focus anymore. And this is how you use the back button focus. If you remember, we discussed that. You can also program the touchscreen to do various functions while looking through the viewfinder. It can help you move the focus point, increase or decrease the ISO, and many other functions. Moreover, the reverse dial function lets you change the increase of exposure compensation and shutter speed or aperture by turning the dial in the opposite direction. So now if you were moving clockwise to increase, if you change this, you're going to move it anti-clockwise to increase. Now I don't know why you would do that, but anyway, it's an option given. On balance, I like the Nikon D5600, especially for its target audience, people who want their first DSLR to be packing a lot of features at an affordable cost. It meets my expectations for what a modern entry-level DSLR should do. And it's hard to deny that the D5600's image quality is anything short of excellent. Nevertheless, for a professional, this may not do the trick. Like, I find the absence of a second command dial more customizable function buttons. I mean, I badly need something for focus area and focus mode. And this may steer a seasoned photographer from carrying it as a backup camera. However, in terms of things like picture quality and overall value, the Nikon D5600 is still quite excellent. It is also worth keeping in mind that most cameras at this price have noticeable features compromises, and the D5600 comes on top of almost all of these. With that in mind, who should purchase the Nikon D5600? The answer is that in many ways it is the perfect option for people who just want an advanced camera that helps them learn the various skills of photography at a very reasonable cost. It is ideal for a hobbyist, a self-learner, and above all, to all those millennials who plan to take photography as a career one day. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. If you watched this video from the start till the end, I thank you very, very much for your patience and perseverance. I literally lost my voice talking this long. I also thank everyone who is watching this video, and hopefully you found this video valuable. If you do, please like this video, share it with your friends, and if you're interested in tech of any kind, then do subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. Check out the other videos of this channel. If you want more reviews of other cameras, do write to me in the comment section below. With that, this is Kalyan Kumar signing off from Product Review, saying goodbye and stay safe.